All right, to trade, a lot of news on China. The White House reportedly moving ahead with plans for President Trump to meet with China's leader Xi Jinping at a summit in November to try and patch things up. Meanwhile, U.S. officials impose new restrictions on nuclear exports to China. Joining us now, Asia watcher Michael Pillsbury with the Hudson Institute. All right, Michael, listen, you know China as well as anyone. You visit there frequently, and you
Yes.
understand it from the top officials to the journalists. And what's the sense now on how long this fight's going to last?
Well, I think a lot depends on the Buenos Aires meeting between the two presidents. They're obviously the deciders. From what I've heard recently, I think the Chinese are forming an offer. They've been searching for President Trump's bottom line. They don't know what it is yet, but they're beginning to form an offer. As you know very well, there's the American 24 points and the Chinese 10 points are in total conflict. There's almost no common ground. That was early May. Now we're 5 months later. I think that things have begun to be sorted out so that the Chinese side knows what it might take to get a deal with President Trump, but I don't think they're there yet. So there is some chance at Buenos Aires. There would be the makings of a deal that President Xi would offer some of the significant concessions President Trump's been looking for. So I'm mildly optimistic that the Chinese want to head off the full 25% tariffs, and they certainly want to head off all of their exports being tariffed at 25%.
Right.
So they have a pretty big incentive.
And to that point, their countermeasures have been mostly tariffs in the 5 to 10% range, which I think underscores the fact you've got a nation that's overly dependent on exports. Would love to have a consumer-driven economy like America, but this wouldn't be the right time to raise prices on their citizens, particularly as the wealth has started to dissipate. 2 days ago, Louis Vuitton made a major warning because their Chinese, their wealthy customers in China, there's no more demand. So there are cracks in the armor, without a doubt. But a lot of folks talk about the ego of both leaders. But in China specifically, the issue of saving face is a cultural issue and how that may play a role ultimately in the resolution.
I think that's a very important point, Charles, that the Chinese seem to want to deny all the allegations. They want to deny technology theft. They want to deny the role of state-owned enterprises. They want to claim that they've got a free market when they really don't. If we let them off the hook on that and go for actual benefits to us, that might be the makings of a deal. It's very hard to get them to confess all this theft and mistreatment of our companies for the last 20 years. They're just not going to do that, in my view. But they might change the treatment of the companies. They might allow a great deal more investment in their closed economy. And most important of all, they might double their purchases of our products.
Well, didn't we see earlier this week, was it BMW that was able to buy out their Chinese joint venture partner? It was either BMW or Mercedes, but we're starting to see...
It's in the Chinese press today.
Okay.
It's news today. It's BMW.
Okay.
And they're touting this as an example of see how China can be nicer. They're also letting the Tesla investment in Shanghai go ahead. So there's these gestures the Chinese are making. It's nowhere near enough for President Trump, in my view. But they're starting to move in the right direction. But again, as you say, without losing face, without acknowledging the wrongdoing in the past.
Michael, one of my biggest concerns when this whole thing evolved was when President Trump accepting victory. At what point does he say, okay, it's a victory? Because, you know, he's got some advisors around him who probably will whisper in his ear, hey, that's not enough. That's not enough. That's not enough. So where do you think he should accept victory? What would be the ideal deal for you?
Well, for me, the ideal is what President Trump has basically written about for almost 20 years. He uses words like reciprocity, level playing field, and more American jobs. His focus is very clear. So if the Chinese would meet one of his demands, I want $100 billion more purchases by you, China, this year and next year, 2 years in a row. That's going to create an awful lot of American jobs. So that's something he's looking for. I think he'll probably get it eventually. The area of technology theft, as you've mentioned many times, Charles, much harder to police, much harder to verify. They've already promised and denied that they ever engage in technology theft. So that's harder to negotiate. There's a third area, which is their economy really following the rules and following the judgments against them at the World Trade Organization in Geneva. There's this famous credit card issue. You know, they promised to let U.S. credit cards be used. They never did. 5 years ago, this was. And now they've got the biggest credit card in the world. So it's a total violation of a WTO ruling against them.
Yeah,
there's some movement in there is possible.
We hear a lot of those points all the time. There was a great article recently about how specifically they bullied one American company, but we see it all the time. But maybe we'll get to a point where this thing will be resolved sooner rather than later. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Michael. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Charles.